My client said, okay, that's all well and good, but let me ask you this. Where did this idea of bankruptcy or debt cancellation come from? Well, I'll tell him it's an old story because I didn't know myself until I started researching it. And I first found it in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, chapter 15. Every 7 years, all debts shall be canceled in honor of the Lord. And I was stunned to see it in the Bible. I just didn't know it. Also in the Bible is the Jubilee, where every 50 years, all debts are to be canceled. So now we might think, well, it was only the Bible that did this. But no, it was found in the Mideast, according to the economist Michael Hudson. There's a famous stone called the Rosetta Stone. Now this Rosetta Stone, many people think it's a software program to learn languages, but they took the name from the Rosetta Stone, which was found in Egypt by Napoleon's men. And what happened, it's written in 3 languages, Aramaic, Greek, and hieroglyphics. Well, it was a Frenchman, Jean-Paul Chapagnon, who was very intelligent, was very fluent in Aramaic and Greek, and with that he was able to translate the hieroglyphics, and now today we can read it. In the British Museum, it's the #1 exhibit. It's a big stone, and it's written, as you say, this is written in stone, so it was very difficult to destroy as such, even though it did get broken up. And what's interesting about it, people don't realize, you can hear it read on YouTube. What's the translation of the hieroglyphics? What does the Rosetta Stone say? And it was a huge contest between the British and the French to translate the hieroglyphics. Well, the French won out. And if you listen to it, King Ramses IV was canceling debt throughout the kingdom and letting people out of jail because they owed taxes. It's the first recorded history of debtor's prison. So what they had to do was Control-Alt-Delete to restart the economy. And this was common because the economy could grind to a halt because everyone owes debt. And if you put everyone in jail, everyone that went to jail because they owed a debt and they couldn't pay it, you're going to stop the economy. Well, also in Babylonia, the same experience, Hammurabi. Was the Hammurabi Code. It says there that the king can declare the cancellation of debt. And they did, from time to time, when the economy ground to a halt. So this idea of debt cancellation existed back then. Now with the Greeks, they don't know what they did. There's not enough record. But the Romans, they do know. And this is what happened with them about debt cancel. What's debt? Well, what's debt cancellation? Well, the Romans, if you owed a debt and you couldn't get out of it, they would say to you, well, the creditors would gather in 3 of them or more, which is very similar to our bankruptcy today, and say to the debtor, you have so many days to pay off the debt. And if you don't pay it off, we have 2 options. We can slice, dice, and shred you like manihana and throw you to the animals, or we'll sell you into slavery. Well, they don't find much of them cutting them up and feeding them to the animals, because then they don't get any money. But we do have records that they sold them into slavery. And another way slavery was developed, the Romans would say to a city, we want to take over your city and we're going to govern it. And the people would say, oh no, we're going to do it ourselves. And the Romans said, if you fight us, that means we have to go to war with you, and you're going to cause us to go to war. And once we prevail, we're going to not let a stone upon a stone be unturned, and we're going to salt the ground so nothing can grow, and then we'll see what we do with you. Well, they had to fight with the Romans, and the Roman army was tremendous, and it won. And rather than feed them to the animals, chop them up and kill them, they sold them into slavery. And you can find this in the Old Testament. It was like Grand Central Station, people going back and forth, selling them into slavery. And actually, that's where the idea comes from. You hear it in The Merchant of Venice, where someone got his pound of flesh. Well, that didn't come from Shakespeare. It existed at the time of the Romans, where someone got their pound of flesh. And it's very chilling, of course. Well, then we go forward to the English. And the English had debtors prison. And they back then, they had really right-wing Republicans, I tell my clients. And by that I mean, if you couldn't afford to pay, they said this: if you couldn't pay your debts and they put you into prison, they were not going to feed you. That's right. So if your friends or relatives didn't bring you food, so sad, too bad, you died. Or if you couldn't fight and take it away from the other prisoners. Well, people don't realize that Charles Dickens' father was in debtor's prison, and he was traumatized by it. And that had a great influence on him and his writing. And many people don't see that A Christmas Carol with Scrooge was a repudiation by Dickens of what's called laissez-faire capitalism.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. I wish I could say they were not.
And the treadmill and the poor law, they're still in full vigor, I presume?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, from what you said at first, I was afraid that something had happened to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
I don't think you quite understand us, sir. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth.
Why?
Because it is at Christmas time that want is most keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What can I put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, sir, that is my answer. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. Those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there.
And some would rather die.
If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, it's not my business.
Isn't it, sir?
No. It is enough for a man to understand his own business without interfering with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Because it was redemption and charity that went out, and Scrooge was converted, quote unquote, to get to charity and love, and the world was a better place. Many people don't realize that. Now, and I even go forward and I say to people, there's a very famous speech in Michael Douglas in Wall Street. And in that speech, Michael Douglas says this:
greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
Everyone's applauding, yay, yay, yay. And it was such a brilliant rhetorical speech. I thought I was listening to Satan, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. How can you repudiate that the logic of what he had to say? Greed works. Greed clarifies. It simplifies. It has marked the upward mobility of man. Well, I thought and thought about it, and if I had to counter him in a debate, it took me about a week to come up with this proposition. I would have liked to come out on stage and have said to the people, you know, that is a great, brilliant insight, but I have just one thing to say, and I'll sit down. But I would have brought out a portrait, and I would have had it cloaked. And I say, I'm just going to pull the curtain back here and let you see something. And I'll sit down. And there would be a picture of Bernie Madoff with a sign that he's holding up saying, greed is good. So tell that to the people that have been defrauded and cheated and have lost their life savings. It melts away the rhetorical argument, greed is good. Anything to extreme usually isn't good, as the Greeks would say, all things in moderation. So I respectfully disagree completely that greed is good and repudiate it by pointing out the consequences, the real consequences of that greed.